sorry about segueing off like that, but we were talking about, your love for the cadets early on in high school and, not marching 2021. When did you first audition for drum corps? And I know it was Crown, correct?
Yeah. I auditioned for Cavaliers, and I didn't make it, um, which is funny because now I'm at Cavaliers.
Yep.
You showed them.
Yeah. Yeah, I went to Crown in '04. A guy that he was one of my, still to this day, one of my best friends. Guy that marched in Rhythm X in 2004. I was on one end of the snare and he was on the other. He marched Crown in '03. And so he just kind of talked me into it. He's like, hey man, you should come march Crown. And I was like, at that point, like Crown was, I think they were 12th. And so I was like, I don't know. But I ended up going to a camp. He talked me into going to a camp, and yeah, Jeff Queen was there, and that was one of the camps where Paul Rennick was there, and so I ended up making it, and I marched my summer at Crown, and I was super thankful because I was such a big cadets fan, and I was taught by cadets. I really only knew one style of drumming. I mean, I knew that 90s, early 2000s cadets, turn your wrist, yeah, elbow up, straight up and down. And then I went and I learned from Jeff, and he had to think I was pretty bad my first camp because I was trying to change everything about my hands. And him and Paul both just kind of, that summer I just learned. I was just introduced to a whole new style of drumming that really opened up my playing.
What was the biggest thing you learned about that style of drumming going to Crown? Is it a more relaxed approach?
More relaxed. It was a lot more about the way you move, which is something that I still try to, incorporate in a lot of the lines that I teach today. Like we talked a lot about connecting one note to the next note. Like there was a lot of like incorporating, the old school cadet way was you turn your wrist for everything. The only thing you could move your arm on was like fast rolls. But you try to play everything with your wrist, and you were, really defined with heights and, and then in my time at Crown, it was more about, I'm gonna say something that's gonna sound like it's mean, but it's more musical. Not saying that the cadet way was not musical, but the way they went about creating the music was completely different. It was a lot of movement-based exercises. It was just kind of it was a whole different idea of technique for me, and I think there are positives and benefits from both. I've tried to incorporate the strengths of all those styles and put them together, but it's definitely it rocked my world for a little bit. I went through a couple week period like before spring training, before I moved in with the Corps, where I felt like I was pretty bad at snare drum again.
That was your first full season of drum corps. That was your first season at all?
Yeah.
Of drum corps?
Yeah.
I mean, you just started talking about it. Were there things like how did you handle the physicality of it? Were there things about having to go through a tour, an entire season like that were really difficult for you as a rookie?
Luckily, I mean, the guys that I was marching with were great. So like we got really close as a group, which always helps. Yeah, physically, I mean, getting ready for your first summer of drum corps it's hard. Drum corps is hard. Your first summer is shockingly hard. Luckily, playing some sports, and I had a decent strength base at the time, so I was okay. I did get shin splints. Those nagging, your whole body hurts when you're marching, but yeah, I mean, it's more the mental side of things. My first summer, I remember it was more just like convince yourself you can get through the day sometimes. Stop thinking about it as a day and think about it as like per block. Like I'm just going to get through this block. I'm going to get through the next block. I'm going to get through the next block. And the kind of the more tired I felt, I would just kind of like lower that limit. So it's just like, just get through this hour, just get through the first hour, but yeah, mentally it was tougher than anything, but the closer you get with the people around you, the more you realize you're all going through it together, so you start to lean on the other people. And that's really when it becomes much, much easier to comprehend.
Yeah.
When you got to Crown, it was somewhat of a transition year, wasn't it? Because was that the year Paul had gone to Phantom?
Yeah. So Paul Paul went to Phantom in 03, and Phantom was his main gig, but he wrote the music at Crown, and I don't know how much he did in 03, but in 04, he did every camp, if I remember right. He did every camp in the off season, and then we had him for about a week and a half or 2 weeks of spring training. Then I want to say he came on the road for a week here, a week there type thing. But it was Jeff Queen was the day to day. He handled pretty much all of tour.
How much staff did you have back then on Crown? Like, who did the snares and basses and tenors? Do you remember it at all?
Yeah, snare tech was Dave Reyes, who was awesome. When Dave was off the road, Jeff was the snare tech. So, which you pick a better snare tech in the world. The quad tech was Kenny Carrico. He was the main quad tech, and I think he was the only one. And bass tech was Teddy Holcomb.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just kind
of those guys.
Oh, go ahead.
Those guys pretty much did the whole summer. Like, we really didn't have anything for backup. Mark Teal was the ran the front ensemble.
Mark Teal, now a judge. Mark Teal.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah, I was kind of asking because I was wondering if it was still in the era where you just had like a core group of staff and that they stayed the whole summer, or you know.
Yeah, I don't remember much turnover. I mean, it was those guys were there, you know. And if Dave went home, Jeff was just the snare tech. I think Jeff did. I want to say he did all of tour.
Yeah.
So you did 2 years of Crown?
Just one.
1 year. Okay, and then you went to Bluecoats the next year, right?
Went to Bluecoats for my age out. Yeah.
How did you land on going that direction?
I was marching with somebody at Rhythm X. Her name was Erin Riggleman, and she had marched at Bluecoats from 01 to 04. And she just aged out. This is for the 05 season, and I was contemplating where I wanted to march, and she kept trying to talk me into going to Bluecoats. And at those days, I always kind of reference Bluecoats as the group that played like elevator jazz music. And so I was like, I really don't want to be in the Bluecoats, and just not into it. And but that was when Mike McIntosh, that was his second year there, and that whole team. And she's kept saying, like, trust me, it's different. Trust me, it's different. So I ended up sending him a tape for auditions because I didn't go to the first couple camps, which back then meant like borrowing a video camera, recording yourself, taking the VHS out, putting it in an envelope and mailing it to somebody, old school. And I got invited to a camp, and I went, and I loved it. It was a really talented group. The music was, I jumped in the audition process late, so I got handed the whole show of music, and I was like, this music is awesome. So I really liked the battery stuff. So I went to a camp and just had a great time, and very thankful for that. I had a really good summer. It was a great age out.
Was there, so that was a different team of educators, right? Was there any sort of, again, another like, oh, here's a different set of philosophies, a different culture that I'm being, introduced to?
Yeah, it was a little different, but it was very similar to like the cadet style. So the snare tech was Tim Maynard. He marched cadets from 97 to 2000 in the snare line. So a lot of the stuff he talked about was a lot of that old school cadet stuff that I was pretty good at. So I had to I went to Crown and I had to, train my hands a whole new way. And then I went to Bluecoats. I had to kind of untrain a lot of those things. But I ended up, like I said, pulling a lot of positives from a lot of those styles and putting them together. And it was, it was a little bit stressful, like having to change your hands that much year to year, but that was an easier transition. It was much harder to go to Crown than it was to go from Crown to Bluecoats.
Was it like a pleasant surprise for you when you got over to Bluecoats that it wasn't like what you thought it was going to be?
Yes. Yeah. And that was, that was a big 04, 05 was a big turnaround point. Like, that was a real shift for the whole drum corps. The whole programming of the shows changed those years. So I had just a wonderful age out summer there. Loved my time there.
Yeah. You marched with Eric Shriver there that year, correct?
Yeah. He was my center. Yeah.
Yeah. Eric's a good guy. He lives here, kind of local to where I'm at. Yeah.
Love Eric.
Yeah. It's interesting when I talk to him about, his time there at Bluecoats and how he got there, but we could save that for hopefully a podcast with him one of these days.
I know that Schreiber did some time with Cavaliers
on staff.
not too long ago. Did you guys overlap at all?
We were no, we technically overlapped, but
But you weren't on
COVID kind
tour
of
at the
ruined the
same
whole
time.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was there a little bit the year before I got there. We were going to be there together in 20, but then that summer didn't happen. And then that 21 truncated COVID summer, he didn't do any time. So we overlapped, but we didn't do any time together, which sucks.
So you did 1 year Crown, 1 year at Bluecoats. How come this might be a stupid question. How come you only did 2 years of drum corps? I mean,
I did a lot of WGI. I started that, and I mean, living in the Midwest, you just kind of that's what you do. So whether it was in high school, and then I did March Trinity, and then I did my 4 years at Rhythm X, and I just drum corps is nowhere near it was not as expensive as it is now, nowhere close, but it was still expensive. So paying for indoor and outdoor, and trying to work full-time jobs to pay fees and all that stuff.
Yeah. Sometimes I forget that there are people that just do winter only, and they'll do their whole career just winter. Yeah.
Let's talk about Rhythm X.
Okay.
Your first year there was 03.
Yep.
That was the first year they were in World?
Correct.
Because they had one open.
Right.
How did you end up there? What was that first experience like, going to auditions and all of that stuff?
There was, at that time, the big talent pool was all in Columbus. I'd say 90% of the players in Rhythm X were all from the Columbus area. So we all kind of knew each other. We just had a lot of friends that were doing it. It was one of those, you started to hear that everybody was doing it. Before auditions, hey, I heard, is it true we're all doing this? Is everybody going? And it was, the answer was yes. So I was like, okay, well, let's go do it. So it was a lot of just a bunch of people that I knew, friends that were going, and it was 15 minutes from my house. So it really just made a lot of sense to do it.
Did you have any awareness of, or was it more of the staff there at the time was more thinking about, oh, we're World now, we have to do the World thing instead of doing the open thing?
Well, they won open, and they tried to get us all to do the year before, but no one wanted to march open, which, independent open in 2003 is nowhere near what it is now. There was even fewer groups, and they weren't very good, including Rhythm X. So we didn't really want to do open. So if they wanted to get all of us to do it, I think part of it was we need to be in World. So they decided to jump. But a lot of people don't know, there wasn't staff in those first couple years. There was, Craig Dunn started the group, and he kind of ran everything, but we didn't have a snare tech. We didn't have a quad tech. We had a guy named Kevin who helped with the bass drums. But we kind of ran ourselves. We'd run our own rehearsals, and which is not the way you should start a group. But yeah, we'd have some people that would show up randomly. Tim Fairbanks came in towards the end of the season and helped us out a lot. He was there in the beginning too. But other than Tim and Craig and Kevin, that was it. We kind of taught ourselves.
How did the show come together? Who was making those decisions?
I don't know if you've seen 2003 Rhythm X, but I'm not sure that it ever did. What wasn't our best presentation, but Craig wrote the front ensemble music, and actually Colin McNutt wrote the battery book that year.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Craig wrote the drill that first year. I might be getting this wrong. Yeah, Tim Fairbanks wrote the battery book that in 2003. 2002, Colin wrote the battery book. So it was just one of those, Craig picked a show, and he wrote the drill, and we just kind of did it. But it was not great. It was it was not the most professional way.
Here's what's interesting though. In retrospect, considering who you were marching with, right, and the fact that you guys took ownership of the group and have now been responsible for the group for the past 20 years, it's actually fitting that's what your early experience was like, you know?
Yeah, it was, when you have like, guys like Andrew Markworth in the snare line, you know, and Andrew wasn't the center snare. He was one off center, but Greg, who was running rehearsal, would ask Andrew what we should do. What do you guys want to do next? And, Andrew would, we got to go top of the show to the chump chumps. We need to work on that. So it was like literally from the floor where, Andrew was basically running rehearsals from the snare line. So it was, so yeah, that kind of stayed that way. We obviously got better and got staff involved, but then when we all started aging out, it's just, we had all kind of like my age out year. I was the snare tech for most of the year. I was center that year.
Yeah. That was 06.
Yeah. So in 07, it was like when people started to just age out, we just kept teaching. It felt like you were just continuing on. And so that, Andrew, Tim, myself, it's been over 20 years that we've been there.
Has it, kind of, just out of curiosity for myself, has it always been at that camp,
Chautauqua?
Chautauqua?
Camp Chautauqua? No. No, we started in Columbus. We had kind of an abandoned warehouse in Columbus. It wasn't abandoned, but it was an empty warehouse. And then we had a couple schools in the Columbus area, and then around 2008, 2009 is when we moved over to Dayton. We just kind of, by that point, Tim Fairbanks was heavily involved. He was heavily involved from the beginning, but he got us into Centerville, so we were rehearsed at Centerville High School. So we kind of just moved over to Dayton around then. So we've been around the Dayton area, but Camp Chautauqua, I think around 2017-ish when we first got in there.
That's a pretty cool zone. I like that, off the beaten path, you when you're driving there, you're like, man, am I going to the right place? Mm-hmm. And then there it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as a performer, you were there essentially for the intro to world and then the sort of rise and knocking on the door, right? Because in 05 and 06, you guys placed second?
Second, yeah. We got, 03, I think we got sixth, which sounds cool, but I think there was only 8 groups. 04, we medaled for the first time. We got third. So sixth, third, second in my 4 years that were there.
It's one thing to be a performer. It's another thing to have the urge to teach and to basically have those sort of natural, like, oh yeah, I could easily transition into teaching. It kind of sounds like somebody like Andrew, for example, that people could tell that he was a future teacher, When did you know that you were like, oh, I'm going to keep doing this. I actually want to keep doing this past performing.
I kind of knew when I was younger that I wanted to teach. I remember like when I was marching drum corps, I remember thinking regularly, like, man, it would be fun to be a staff member. Like, I want to keep doing this, but I want to teach. So I think I always had that desire, that drive to do it. Then it was just finding opportunities, so teaching at high schools and, doing whatever I could to build some experience, teaching for free at places, just to kind of build a resume. And then I was very lucky the year after I aged out at Rhythm X, they needed somebody to work with the snares. And I actually wasn't on staff the first half of the year. They didn't need anybody. And then I came on at the end. So just kind of opportunity fell in my lap and I ran with it. So I was very lucky on that front, but I wanted to teach. I started teaching at Bluecoats in 2007, which is, so I had one summer off. I knew I wanted to teach drum corps. So I was just very lucky that, opportunities came my way. And they were at places that, how lucky are you to, your first place is a place that you marched on both sides. I taught at Rhythm X after aging out, and I taught at Bluecoats after aging out at Bluecoats. So very lucky.
Were there any big lessons or big mistakes, big revelations those first couple of seasons? Because there was some comfort level there, right? Because you had just aged out essentially of both places. You knew the language, you knew, sort of what the values were. But it's one thing, teaching and performing are two different things, Did you learn any very early lessons as a teacher trying to do it for the first time at that level too?
Yeah, big time, especially at drum corps. The first thing I learned was shut up. um, that was like I always tell people like that are getting involved in teaching. One of the best things you can do is not say anything sometimes. And it doesn't mean don't say anything, but like you don't need to prove yourself.
Is that for you? Like, so that, because I think you had mentioned before, right? One of the things about angst was, everybody after a rep, they have 25 things in their head that they could say. And he's able to distill that down and know what to say and how to say it, right? Is that more, so like when you say something like take a moment, right? Don't say the first thing that comes to your brain. Is that more for you, or is that also more for the kids?
Well, it's I guess both. So, Eric Ward is always the guy I try to mimic the most in the way he taught. I still think he's the greatest at cleaning a drum line I've ever been around. You would play 10 reps of something, and he wouldn't say a word, and then he'd cut, and then he would say one thing, and then we'd do another 10. He didn't talk a lot. And one day I asked him, I was like, "Why? What's going on? Why do you do that?" And he's like, "I'm just trying to figure out what the most important thing is." And he always said, he's like, "So you got 9 snares, and if you give 3 comments after every rep, these 3 here are the first comment, these 3 here are the second, and these 3 here are the third. You're never really fixing anything. You're knocking away at things, but in small percentages, as opposed to get everybody focused on one thing." And so for me, when I first started teaching, there was a lot of insecurity. I wanted to prove myself. This was a smart decision. So you overteach. You're giving comments left and right, and because you're trying to prove to the people that hired you that you were worth it. But that's not your job. Your job is what can you get the students to understand? How far can you get them to progress? So they need more drumming and more precise information. So I had to keep telling myself, shut up. Like, yeah, it's slow. Yeah, that's wrong. Yep, don't worry about it right now. You'll have your time to get that. So I had to remind myself constantly to just let them get some reps on this. Get them fixing this one thing, right? Don't move on to the next thing until this thing's fixed, because otherwise you're not really fixing much. So my mistake was I tried to overteach. I was trying to prove myself to the world, and but that was selfish. And as soon as you jump into that teaching world, it's not about you. It's not. It's like if you want to be on, you want to be on the videos and all that, so that's fine. But I mean, it's about them, and it's what can you get out of them. And I remember, like when I was in Eric's drum lines, he made my life feel really easy. Hey, that triplet roll is slow. Okay, let's play that faster. And then he wouldn't stop talking about it until it was fixed. So it just, I felt very focused as a player. I knew exactly what we were working on, but when I had those rehearsals where I was getting a lot of information from a lot of people, I mean, my brain can't process all that information. I end up in some realms, like my brain just kind of shuts off and I'm just drumming, so I'm not really working on too much. So that was the biggest mistake I made, is I was trying to prove myself to the world. And, what I needed to do was earn the trust of my players and make their lives easier.
Was there anything shocking or again, like revelations, changing your perspective all of a sudden from this is what it feels and sounds like in the line, and now all of a sudden you're not in the line, you're out in front, were there any big takeaways from that? Like, can you think back to remembering, like, oh, I wish I would have known what it was like from out front while I was in the line?
Yeah, so if you guys have been around me before shows, I don't know if have you guys been around me like in the tunnel before shows?
No.
I'm a nervous mess. I pace. I mean, I'm a wreck. When I was a performer, I was never nervous because I was in control. Like I knew that I just needed to go out there and do my job. So that was a perspective that when I started teaching hit me really hard. Like, because when you send your players out to do a show, that's like pushing the baby bird out of the nest and hope it flies. But you don't have any control over it anymore. So that I remember that, like, that hit me really hard. Like I'm not in control anymore. You know, when you were center snare, you know, and you'd marched a bunch of years, like you felt like you could control the ensemble. Things felt slow. You could start to push tempos. You could move around. Like you had this playability inside of the ensemble. You could like make it feel right. And when you're in the stands, man, and it feels slow, you're just like, oh man, they're not going to fix it. You know.
It's funny. I just got the chills because I remember what that felt like. I don't think I was. I mean, last time I was center was in high school, right? Because unfortunately I marched with Roger Carter, so he was center. But that feeling of when you're in the line of like being able to, you're so in tune, and you're with what's going on, and feeling like you're able to sort of influence things that are almost imperceptible outside of that.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was just like when you talked about that. That's immediately where I remember that. I remember that feeling.